Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so we'll begin today's talk uh, by Sri Srinath Mohandas, who is an assistant professor at the School of Ethics, Governance, Culture and Social Systems at Chinmaya Vishwa Vidyapeeth. Uh, he is an educator who is specializing in curriculum and pedagogy, and he has experience in developing content, designing curriculum, and teaching middle and high school levels. So he's really targeting children at young age. As a value educator, he has conceived and conducted workshops based on Chinmaya Vision program as part of schools' initiatives to foster cultural values. He also writes, speaks, and conducts youth workshops on various themes related to the Indian knowledge systems. Outside academics, he is keenly interested in folklore and cultural narratives, which have become the theme for his blogs and storytelling sessions. So I was reading from his official CV. As you can see, he is Mr. Mohandas is a very interesting personality, and now he's on the screen. You can see him. He's very young, dashing, handsome, and the fact that he is involved with value education among schools, I think that's a great plus, and we need more people like him today. And I can remember, I think Mr. Satish Chandra was also there. Are we there now? Was he there? No? Okay. Many years ago, there was, when the Kargil war happened, there was a group of ministers, and they had come out with a report. And one of the recommendations at that time was that we should inculcate a sense of nationalism starting from schools. And NCC was mentioned there. And this thought has been with us for a very long time. Uh, of course, the governments can do quite a lot in this area, but reputed organizations like the Chinmaya Mission or Ramakrishna Mission and many other civil society organizations, their acceptability will be probably much higher. So I see your efforts from that angle as well, from national security angle also, because we need to have a young generation which is steeped into nationalism and patriotism. And these are not the values which can be imposed. And that's why I think reference to our culture, our civilization, our heritage, our religion, that becomes very important. And I think being an educator uh, to inculcate, foster, encourage values is a very important, very important function. So I'm glad that you are doing that. I remember when we were in school, we used to start with a prayer. Now I do not know. I think the prayers have been dispensed with in schools because there's so much controversy about prayers. Who do you pray for? What do you say? This religion, that religion, etc., etc. But the idea was really common human values. That is what we need to inculcate. And of course, Vedanta is a fantastic framework to inculcate those values, which emphasize unity in the whole of creation. So I think the key message of divinity which Vedanta gives uh, should be acceptable to all. So it's a universal value. And I think today we are talking about nationalism and Vedanta. So we hear you. And the fact that you use also folklore and culture to inculcate and also storytelling, etc. Use these methods. So the the impression is lasting. So please tell us some more about this. And of course, we should make it into a whole movement, not simply, one-off lecture here, one-off lecture there, etc. So Vivekanand Kendra, with whom we are associated, they also do a lot of work in terms of character building and so on. So maybe we could all work together and focus on how to inculcate a sense of patriotism and nationalism, but at the same time also foster human values. It is so very important, particularly today's conflict-ridden world. So I want to thank Rohit, who I think organized this talk. Thank you very much, Rohit, and thank you very much, Professor Mohandas, for joining us today. Look forward to your talk. So we have our BIF faculty here, and they're all keen to. So over to you.
Thank you, sir. I hope I am audible. My screen is clear also. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Nice words that you have shared with me. Just a point I want to mention is that I'm an assistant professor in the School of Ethics, Governance, Culture, Social Systems. I work in the Department of Education. So basically, I'm an assistant professor in education at Chinmaya Vishwavidyapith. Fostering values and all of that. We are focusing on creating an ecosystem in Chinmaya Vishwavidyapith, which, as you would know, is a very new university, just 5 years old, which is specializing in IKS, Indic Knowledge Systems. Of course, one set is having a lot of courses in IKS so that students can take as they like. The second aspect is to create an ecosystem within the university that any student who steps in will actually be permeated by it. So, yeah, I just wanted to add this. And at the personal level, I've been in touch with a lot of friends in Vivekananda Kendra, and I have done a few sessions partnering with them. So thank you so much for the invite. Let me just get into my presentation now. I'm an assistant professor in education. My expertise is not in political science or history, and things like that. And therefore, naturally, the question comes: am I qualified enough to speak on nationalism, which is more considered to be a political science subject in that sense, or even, for that matter, history? So my association with nationalism has always been. I was inspired by Swami. I am still inspired by Swami Vivekananda. And my whole introduction to this reading complete works of Swami Vivekananda when I was 18 or 19 years old. And that actually shaped my thoughts and more importantly, gave me a lot of energy. And I more looked at as a disciple of Swamiji who wants to fulfill his vision. That's more how I look into it. And that is my foundation while approaching to this particular topic, giving a lecture on this. This is more a loud reflection. I'm sure that all of you, especially having associated with VIF for such a long time, I'm sure that all these thoughts that I'm going to share is already thought about deeply by you. But then it is important that we keep going back to the fundamentals and trying to refresh ourselves so that something new might come out of it. So this is more in the context, more given as a loud reflection, this particular talk that I'm approaching. The context for this talk, the background was Rohit and I were having a conversation. We were talking about nationalism in general and how nationalism is being understood today and how nationalism is even derided as a fanatic ideology, and or the nationalists are considered to be lesser men. So all those discussions came up in all those points came up in our discussions, and we were just trying to understand. So was it always like this, or there is a certain strong ideological push for it? And then a few points came up, all of which were put together, and I'm trying to convey it in the next 30 minutes. In that context, in that discussion, Rohit also shared with me one of the writings of S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister of India. So I went through the his recent book published in 2022. And then two paragraphs actually struck me. And I thought maybe thinking more about that will actually convert into a deliberation on nationalism and also on Vedanta. So these are the two paragraphs that I came across. The first paragraph he says, what will be different about India is that unlike in many other parts, the sense of nationalism does not translate into an us versus the world mentality. For reasons that derive from our innate pluralism, there is a tradition of reconciling the nationalism with global engagement. Not driven by victimhood, it has a potential to serve as a bridge between established and emerging orders. And then he goes on to say, what has really distinguished India from China of the 1950s and 60s or the Japan of 1930s was that it never resorted to domestic mobilization on the basis of anti-Western sentiment. This largely non-fictional, but not always cordial record of ties between the West and India is noteworthy. So this actually, here he mentions a few very critical points, which serves as a reflection to look upon our own nation, at least in the last 100 years. So what has led to the nationalism and what has led to the formation of the modern Indian state that all of us are citizens of? So that serves a context for this whole talk. Now going back to the foundation, so what is this nationalism that we understand? How do we define nationalism? Now it is very true that there is no commonly acceptable, unanimously accepted definition for nationalism. A lot of people have explained it in different ways. However, some of these definitions really stand out. Nevertheless, whatever it is definition, we must accept that it is one of the most compelling political creeds that has shaped the world during last 2 centuries. We say after French Revolution, that is when the nations of the world started rising, or at least that is how it is understood these days. Nationalism has united people, like we have seen in Europe, where small kingdoms came together and became large nation states or bigger nation states like Germany and Italy. Then we also saw that nationalism has divided people, like the great USSR broke into pieces, many small nations. Even the British Empire broke into many small nations and many different nations and states, India being one of them. So whether we understand nationalism correctly or not, one thing we cannot deny is that it is a great power and that has expressed itself in last 300 years, and that makes it worthy of our attention. That makes it worthy of our study of that. A commonly acceptable, or let us say, I wouldn't say commonly acceptable, but a widely accepted definition of nation is given by political scientist and historian Benedict Anderson, who said a nation to a great extent is an imagined community. So imagined community, that concept is there, held together by collective beliefs, aspirations, imaginations of its members. It is based on certain assumptions which people make about collective whole, with which they identify. So this is what he says about a nation. And this is, by the way, this definition I borrowed right from NCERT textbook of Government of India. I think this comes in the 8th standard textbook. So this is how nation is being explained. So nation has a common history. It has a common territory. There are shared political ideals like democracy, etc. Then there is a common political identity of being a democratic republic, etc. And then there are some shared beliefs of why they are united. So this is the popular understanding of nation, we can say. Now, one thing that is stark here is that this is a very secular understanding of nation, and rightly so. It is understood in that particular way. Now, when we understand nation this way, now the natural question comes: now, is there a different way of understanding nation, especially from an Indian point of view? As an Indian, how do I look at nation? Is this completely acceptable to me? Now, I don't think this is unacceptable to me. This is absolutely acceptable to me. But the point is that, but nation is something more than that, right? It is something closer to me. It is not just I'm tied with my nation by my emotions. It is not like I'm a fan of Real Madrid. My identity and association with my nation is not limited to is not same as my emotional connection with a football club or a IPL team that I really care for. So I see something greater than myself in this nation, and therefore it actually pays for the question. So is there something more than secular to it? So, as we understand the Indian history, or how the Indian history has written after independence, there have been many versions of about Indian history. But I think 2 points of view can be considered most dominant. The first point of view is Indian nation was the result of anti-colonial movement of late 19th and 20th century. India is united because there is a sense of being oppressed. At that particular point of time, there was a sense of being oppressed by the colonial powers, and that provided a shared bond between all the communities and all the nations within this larger, within the Indian subcontinent, which actually solidified them. So here, nation is a result of a specific or of a set of events, of a specific events in time. So that is exactly what this point of view actually champions, and this is what I meant as a secular view earlier. And this is the most popular academic view as well. If you talk about nationalism in the academic circles, this is almost taken for granted. You cannot to actually question this view would be, what do I say? It will be blasphemous in some sense. Not everybody will, will attack you in that sense, but there is a if you actually question this particular view, there is a chance that you might not be treated really well. So as against this, whenever we understand Indian nationalism from the the stories associated with it, from real life conversations with people who have participated in it, another view actually comes up, and this view is point POV2, that is point of view number 2, which is that India always existed as a nation, and this existence of nation was on the basis of shared civilizational ideas. And it is these shared civilizational ideas and values that actually provided the commonness, that provided the bond between the people. Here, the concept is that the nation has an existence and life of its own. And it's not merely a product of the time and the space and the set of events that actually led to it. Now, while the POE1 is very popular among the academic circles, it is POE2 that actually has captured the imagination of the public. And for the simple fact that most of the Indians, or a vast majority of Indians, actually subscribe to it, actually makes it a very compelling argument that we should actually invest in. Right. So, yeah, so these are the 2 point of views that we are thinking about. So there is no harm in looking at the Indian nationalism from POV1. But what I would argue is that is more like a so you have already defined what nationalism is, and you're trying to appropriate the Indian experience into that already established view of nationalism and clip whatever you think is unsuitable or whatever you think is obsolete. And therefore it's a very polished, or it is a very artificial understanding of Indian nationalism is what we think about. I think. So in that context, we can ask 2 questions. So is Indian nationalism an appropriation of Western nationalism? And then is there something more distinct about Indian conception of a nation or Indian conception of nationalism? I think in this regard, to understand Indian nationalism, I think understanding Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo really helps. I'm talking about the point of view 2. So to understand Indian nationalism from POV 2, understanding the nationalism as conceived and propagated by Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo actually helps. Why Aurobindo? Why Swami Vivekananda and Aurobindo? Now, I was actually going through the names of these nationalist leaders of the early 20th century who actually were in the forefront of the national movement, and cutting across the parties, cutting across the ideologies in terms of moderates, extremists, communists, etc. One thing that stands really out is that most of these leaders were actually inspired by Swami Vivekananda. They acknowledges his influence in each one of them. And then they also believe that he has contributed substantially to the spirit of nationalism that invoked in India, especially during the 1, 2, 3, the first 3 decades of of 20th century. I'm talking about leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Rabindranath Tagore, Bipin Chandra Pal, Mohandas Gandhi, of course, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, Subhash Chandra Bose, Vinoba Bhave, Rajagopalachari, Radhakrishnan, Sardar Patel. So these are all very big names. And all of them has acknowledged the contribution of Vivekananda in shaping themselves. So it is also interesting that Swami Vivekananda came at a critical juncture in Indian history, where the first war of independence, 1857, was over, and then that was a demoralization for the nationalists, as far as the nationalists were concerned. And for the next couple of decades, there were not much talk about freedom and all of that. And then Vivekananda comes, he gives us a rousing call, and he goes on to propagate the idea of India, and what India actually has to, what is that India has to contribute to the world, etc. And Swami Vivekananda passes away, has his samadhi in 1902, and within next 2 decades, we can actually see crops, of young revolutionaries, who coming up and championing this particular cause. In fact, in 1912, Lokmanya Tilak also said Vivekananda is the father of Indian nationalism. So that's a public acknowledgement of that. Now, but how Vivekananda himself looked at this particular aspect is he categorically said, I am no politician or political agitator. I care only for the spirit. When that is everything, he says, I'm no politician or political agitator. I care only for the spirit. When that is right, everything will be right and by itself. So Swami Vivekananda never associated himself as a nationalist from a political point of view. He considered himself as a sannyasi, as a person who has to touch the spirit of the masses. So that was his primary identity. Yet he became the father of Indian nationalism. So that itself shows that nationalism has an appeal which is far more, which is beyond politics, which is beyond social. And somebody who's spiritual, who believed in the spiritualism like Swami Vivekananda, when he preaches nationalism, therefore that nationalism has to be coalesced with spirituality. Vivekananda also says that the road to Indian nationalism is through spiritualism, and he says religion as a basis of national freedom. So when Swami Vivekananda says religion as a basis of national freedom, he is definitely not meaning religion in the sense the Western world uses it. Here he uses religion more from a spiritual point of view, which is, and Vedanta is the religion that he is talking about, not any set of dogmas or doctrines. Rather, he understands Vedanta as the universal principles of spirituality. So he says that is what the nationalism in India is all about. So when we actually come across, Vivekananda was already addressing to an Indian nation, right? So when Vivekananda is speaking, he's already addressing to an Indian nation. It is not that we have to create a nation, right? And then I'm calling people to create one nation. So he understands this as a long continuity that is coming from the dawn of civilization. And he more pitches his call as we have to reawaken the spirit of nationalism in India. So at one point of time, the national soul was very active and conscious, and then it went through a lot of vicissitudes. And at one point, in a historical time, it has come down. Now it's a responsibility to reawaken or bring back to the fore. So that is the pitch he is giving. And this actually clears that, also shows that according to him, nation is not an entity, a secular entity, but it is a being in itself. It is a spirit in itself. And when I say spirit, it is not just being used in a metaphoric sense, more in a poetic sense, but something more than poetry, something which has a reality on its own right. So he praised nationalism based on 4 ideals. He said the awakening of the masses who form the basis of the nation, development of physical and moral strength in people, unity based on common spiritual ideas, consciousness of and pride in the ancient glory and greatness of India. So again, the concept of nationalism here is very connected, intimately connected to the concept of spirituality. That is how he has put it forward. He also talks about development of physical and moral strength of its men, which is basically a character building effort. right? So when Jaishankar says that in India, nationalism is not just about fighting against or mobilizing against a common enemy. Here, nationalism is more projected as a self-development exercise, where the participant of the nationalism also gets better. He gets refined in the very process, which is so that is exactly what we call as sadhana, or that is exactly what we call as spiritual. What do I say? Spiritual disciplines, etc. Right? He also categorically said nationalism is nation building and it is the art of man making, which by which he meant character building. Um, he brought in this idea that serving the nation is actually a sadhana in its own right, and he actually brought forward the idea of karma yoga. So in Vedanta, and this is where it also comes in union with Vedanta. So in Vedanta, the Vedantic view of life, you know, we have the Purushartha. Right? We have every individual has fourfold goals to fulfill in life, and that are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And moksha being the ultimate goal of life. And the whole of life is actually a life well lived is actually a preparation for the final. And you have Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga. And Karma Yoga is a path of action, path of selfless action, where you actually pour out your service to a great ideal that you actually stand for, which actually results in your purification and then makes you fit student for the final mukti. So the whole idea that he brought nationalism or participating in nation building as an act of karma yoga in itself is just like bringing spirituality into the market is in the right sense of the word. Right? He actually made it accessible to the people, or it actually inspired them in a way that we might not see in many other places of the world. At the same time, he was a nationalist to the core. At the same time, he also preached humanism and universalism. So this is another contradiction this is another thing that many people find as a contradiction. How can a nationalist be a universalist? If you are a nationalist, then you are an exclusivist. You belong to an exclusivist ideology. Then how can you open yourself uh, to the larger world? So this is another dichotomy. However, in the Indian sense, we don't see it as a dichotomy. There is absolutely no what do I say? There's absolutely no disconnect between nationalism and universalism that way. It is not one against the other. We will reflect upon how that is so. And interestingly, he also said that, or rather, he also believed that every nation has a destiny to fulfill. So Indian nation has a destiny to fulfill. And in the same way, he would also acknowledge the great nation of America. He would also have no qualms acknowledging various other nations of the world. So the very fact that you accept and acknowledge and also believe that every nation in the world has a role to play in the world and has also a destiny to fulfill in the world, that is actually talking about it is acknowledgement of it's not an expansionist ideology where you want to conquer more and more nations and you want to overpower other nations. So it is like all of us have a place in this world and all of us work together. Similarly, Aurobindo, if you look at Sri Aurobindo, he's hailed as a prophet of Indian nationalism. His political idea was mainly based on four important pillars: concept of complete freedom, the idea of spiritual nationalism. So again, nation is understood from a very spiritual point of view. Theory of boycott and resistance, which is more his political uh, uh, life, pertaining to his political life, and then his concept of human unity. So here is another prophet of nationalism who talks about spiritual nationalism, who also talks about the concept of human unity and humanism, integral humanism. Integral yoga is what he propagated. He also brings in a very interesting concept of national ego versus national soul. So he says, Sri Aurobindo believed that there is a dividing line between national ego and national soul. National ego stands for a kind of correlative attributes of subjectivity, while national soul remains at the heart and core of belongingness to one another. Therefore, national ego makes a kind of hindrance towards broader unification. National soul integrates the world of humanity into one. National ego sometimes may become quite aggressive, like German imperialism, and at a time self-protective too. So I think this whole secular conception of nation and how nationalism might lead to fanatism, etc. I think Sri Aurobindo is trying to put that into perspective by bringing this distinction between national ego versus national soul. So he says national ego makes a kind of hindrance towards broader unification, whereas national soul integrates the whole world into one entity. So this is something that we need to highlight and something that we need to celebrate as well, which is coming from the Indian national landscape, Indian nationalist landscape. He visualized nationalism in terms of human unity, realization of the national soul. He emphasizes neither geographical continuity nor a history of the interdependence of distinct Indian cultures, but rather a persistent spiritual orientation that expresses itself in each embodiment of actual Indian culture. Very interestingly, he also sees while Vivekananda saw nationalism as a sadhana, as a practice of karma yoga. Sri Aurobindo also sees it in a similar light, but he also actually calls it an upasana of Shakti. So, and he thinks that is a fit instrument for Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga as a foundation for serving the national cause. We all know about Bhavani Mandir, the secret society he created, where he wanted to bring together a group of young men across the nation who would actually serve the cause of Indian freedom to the exclusion of everything else. And there will be Shakti Upasakas. So we have Bharat Mata or Mother Bhavani as a deity, right? So it is unlike in the European context where they too had a personification of a national symbol. Here it is actually a deity in its own right, like in Mahishasuramardini or Kali. Bharat Mata is also actually viewed in that sense. And here in Bhavani, Mother Bhavani, that is Durga Parameshwari herself, is considered as personification of this here. According to Aurobindo, there are three pillars of power. Three pillars are powers for the spirit, which are spirituality, the intellectuality, which is related to the mind, the national being, and also vitality, which is the life and body of the national being. I will just mention about one more person, Sri Subramania Bharati. It's actually a very fine integration of both Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. As we all know, Sri Subramania Bharati was inspired by Sister Nivedita, who was a direct disciple of Swami Vivekananda. So even though Subramania Bharati has not met Vivekananda in person, he was actually inspired by his ideas through the Sister Nivedita. Later, when Sri Aurobindo went to Pondicherry, he was living right next to him, like 2 streets away. And every evening they used to spend time together and discuss a lot of these things. And Subramania Bharati was also somebody, a great nationalist who inspired the cause of Indian nationalism, especially in especially in Tamil Nadu, the southern part of India. So here Subramania Bharati actually saw Bharat Mata not just as a metaphor, but an article of faith and an experiential reality. The whole concept of deification to a devata is actually spoken about by him. And that was the direct effect on him of Swami Vivekananda as well as Sri Aurobindo. He talked about the manifestation of Shakti and human spirit. And most interestingly, he found absolutely no contradiction in praising Tamil Thai, that is Mother Tamil, and then Bharat Mata at the same time. So today we know this whole Dravidian view about nation and how Tamil has an independent existence and cannot be mapped to the rest of the India and all such misconceptions. So here is a great Tamil poet who would actually found no contradiction in praising Tamil Thai and Bharat Mata, and he actually saw both of them as a manifestation of same Bhavani, same mother. Yeah. So now seeing Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and a little bit of Sri Subramania Bharati, what are the core principles that we can take from their view of Indian nationalism? So I think all of the three of them would, if you distill their thoughts, I think they will come into this. So nation is a spiritual entity with an existence and life of its own. So it has a chiti and dharma. So it has a karma of its own to do. So what is chiti and dharma? I'll briefly explain. I'm sure that all of us would know. Uh, Shri Deen Dayal Upadhyay has given in his integral humanism speeches. He has extensively deliberated on this. But to put it in a simple word, the state is brought into existence to protect the nation and to produce and maintain conditions in which the ideals of nation can be translated into reality on a continuous basis. The ideals of the nation are its chiti. The norms, laws that help manifest and maintain chiti of a nation are termed as dharma of that nation. And this dharma is a repository of nation's soul. So we have chiti, dharma, and karma for a nation. Now, dharma can be connected to I think dharma can be understood as the constitution of the nation, right? So today, including our beloved, Honorable Prime Minister, we all vouch on the constitution of the country, right? We all invoke the constitution of the country. Now, constitution, in this point of view, would not become the soul of the nation, but it is the dharma of the nation, and it is there to ensure that right conditions are maintained in the country so that the soul can manifest in itself. So I think in today's contextual or in today's discourse, we are actually not touching on the chiti of the nation. We are only talking about dharma, which is more about the constitution, and we are absolutely not talking much about the karma of a nation, right? Which has its own karma to live, like any other individual has. Now, nationalism is a dynamic expression of this conscious principle at a particular day and age. So, Chiti is expressing itself at different points of time through the members, through the population of, or through the people of that society is actually what is nationalism. Now, Indian nationalism of 19th and 20th centuries was a reawakening of the national consciousness lying dormant for centuries. So when the secular POV one, the secular view would say that the Indian nationalism of 19th and 20th century is actually a mobilization against the colonial oppression of the people. Here we are saying that it is one of the factors that led to it. Whereas what has happened is that it is a national consciousness that has reawakened. So I think it is from this point of view, Swami Vivekananda also pays rich tribute to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the great Maratha emperor, when he is explaining about the phenomenon as the national conscience was waiting for the right body to manifest so that it can reawaken once again in the society. And Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, you found the nationalism, the national conscience found the right body. So that is his articulation about it. Nation's existence is not, I think this is very important here. Nation's existence is not threatened by diversity, whereas it acknowledges diversity as nature of the world. So when Swami Vivekananda or Sri Aurobindo or let us say Subramanya Bharati, when they were talking about Indian nation in 1900s or late 1800s, now they very well know that the Indian nation that they are talking about includes present day Pakistan to Assam to Kerala to Karnataka to central India to northern India. So they very well understand that this is a very diverse community. This is a very people with different languages, different so-called ethnicities, different cultures, customs, traditions, etc. In spite of that, they call it one nation, and they never think that uniformity needs to be brought into. So they are never talking about bringing a national. They talk about national unity, but they never talk about bringing a uniformity of all these cultures. There is no program to make them all of them into uniform, which means that they are never threatened by the diversity that actually exists, and they acknowledge diversity as a nature of the world. Whereas when you look at the Western counterpart, I think the Western nations are actually threatened by diversity. So there is always this push for finding that unity, and to bring that unity, uniformity is away. You clip down diversity one by one. Impose a common language, impose a common culture, etc., etc. Whereas that was not the case with India at any point of time. Then, of course, nationalism as spiritual, as a sadhana, karma yoga. Another interesting point I found out, and this is mostly I have heard this mostly being spoken by Swami Chinmayananji. Um, um, so he says that the concept of nationalism. So somebody was asking him, what is the relation between, or how do the concept of nationalism, universalism stand together? So Swami Chinmayanji actually brings this idea of positive integration. So he says that to begin with, we are all individuals, right? But then we are born into a family. So now I learned at my home to keep preference, to give preference to my family over myself. So we have in Indian tradition, we have this father who takes care of his family. We have the mother who looks after the family first, and children, they take care of their parents first. So from individual, you expand yourself into a family. And then many families make a community, which is actually a training for you to actually keep community first and family second and yourself last. So there is a positive integration. There is an expansion of mind where you bring people together and communities to the nation. So now you are asked to keep nation first. So and we have this slogan also, right? Nation first. But that, and then the natural progression from nation is to embrace the whole world. Now the question can be asked, then why can't we embrace the world in the first place? Why do we have to do it in a step-by-step basis? And the answer Swami Chinmayanji gives is that it is not something that naturally comes to us. It has to be trained. You have to be consciously training. So larger and larger groups of people, you try to identify yourself and embrace yourself. So nationalism in that way is looked at as a stepping stone towards universalism. Now, just because I love my nation, I don't dissolve my family. The moment I start loving my family doesn't mean, the moment I start loving my nation doesn't mean that, I don't have to take care of my family from today onwards. So you keep expanding yourself, you keep embracing more and more people into your fold, which doesn't mean that you have to give up on the first step that you actually started with. In the same way, to be a universalist, we need not give up on nations, right? Just like how we don't give up on our families just because we want to serve a national cause. So, so I think this is a very interesting concept that Indian nationalism puts forward. Similarly, it acknowledges the existence of many nations, with each of them having a destiny to fulfill and contribute to the enrichment of the world. So every nation has a destiny to fulfill. I'll just take 5 more minutes and conclude my talk here. Now, this is a very interesting idea of nationalism, especially when you contrast it with the European understanding of nationalism, or let us say the left ideological understanding of nationalism, etc. And I believe this framework is actually, the framework of Vedanta. So here the conception of a nation is like the conception of an individual as a jivatma with a body. As a jivatma with a mind, body, and intellect for self-expression and fulfilling the purpose of the world. So from the Vedantic point of view, at the end of the day, it is one Atman, one indivisible principle, the conscious principle, which has become many jivas, and each jivas, in order to express itself, has taken a body, mind, intellect complex, which we call our shariram. So we have sukshma shariram, sthula shariram, etc. And then why has the jiva taken body, mind, and intellect? Because it has certain karmas to exhaust. It has certain, or simply put, it has a certain purpose to fulfill. Now, this is exactly how a nation is also being viewed at. Nation are being understood as a even more subjective entity, or even more not subjective, even more subtle entity than an individual. Also, another interesting thing is that nationalism doesn't become a threat to diversity, and nationalism is not threatened by diversity. This can happen only when when we understand when we understand nation as something more than what material life is all about. Generally, as a general principle, we may say that diversity can naturally lead to chaos. But our rishis actually saw unity in underlying diversity. So diversity doesn't become a threat if and only if there is a fundamental unity that the beholder is able to perceive in all those diverse things. Unless unless we are able to perceive an underlying unity in all this diversity, we try to we try to bring about that unity by clipping the diversity, which is basically what we call bringing uniformity into the space. And this is because of this Advaitic vision, the Vedantic vision, that is culture that the civilization already has, and that is expressed through a few words, like a few terms. Let me say, one, we have this concept of Ekameva Advitiyam, which means there is Brahman alone, the one without a second. Then Sat, that is that existing principle thought, I shall be many, I shall be one. So this is from Chandogya Upanishad. I remember when I was doing a youth workshop. The theme was Idea of India. I think this was in 2017. So I think there were about 25 youngsters, and we were discussing this idea of India. And one of the Swamis, one of the Acharyas of Chinmaya Mission, his name is Swami Abhayananda, he was also attending the session. He was very magnanimous to attend the session. And after the class, after the session, he actually called me in person and told that it is not that there are many things and we are trying to find unity in it. It is not that there are many Indian states. It is not that there are many languages in India. It is not that there are many cultures in India and we are trying to find one India in all of that. But it is more like it is one that has become many. You know, that there is India and it expresses itself through different cultures, language, traditions, and customs. So the one who is able to perceive India will not be threatened by an Assamese culture or a Tamil culture or a Punjabi culture. Whereas somebody who cannot see India will always be threatened by a different. Give me a second. Yeah. Right. So somebody who is not able to perceive the unity in it will always feel threatened by it. And this is because this is the Advaitic vision of Ekameva Advitiyam. So there is this absolute Brahman which has become many. And Ekoham Bahusyam. This, and it says that the entire manifestation, the entire cosmos came out in this particular fashion. That is one manifested as many. We also say Loko Bhinna Ruchiki, right? Every individual has a taste and preference of its own. We cannot kill diversity. We cannot make everything uniform because the very nature of the world is to become diverse. And only that philosophy, only that ideology which understands this will be actually be successful, which will be actually be able to serve the world. And Indian nationalism, Indian understanding of nationalism is actually well aligned to it. So I think we will have to make a distinction when somebody calls nationalism as a very exclusivist idea. Then I think we might have to say that, but that is not the reality with Indian nationalism. So the slogan is unity without uniformity and diversity without fragmentation, and that is possible in this Vedantic framework to nation. The way forward, just 3 points. I think we need to own this philosophy of nationalism. We need to champion this philosophy of nationalism and re-articulate in a contemporary way for the grasp and appreciation of the world. So many times, even I find it very difficult to articulate many times for the lack of proper words. I mean, it could always be attributed to my lack of command over English, but still, I think some of these ideas are very, very, very subtle that we don't have right expressions to make it happen. So I think, therefore, a re-articulation is very much important. Another suggestion is that this philosophy is at the heart of not just meaningful engagement between nations, but it is also it also has a genuine appreciation and celebration of each other, which pays for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So in last 10 years at least, this term has come to the fore once again, which means the entire world constitutes a family. So somebody was telling me the other day, you talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is family, and then you also talk about Indian nationalism. How does these two things reconcile? There's a fundamental contradiction. So there is no contradiction from the deliberations we had just now. So these are the 3 points with which I conclude. Now I'm open for all the feedback and thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinathji, for that brilliant talk. I think you have very simple but profound manner explained what internationalism is. And there's usually a lot of confusion about it, and particularly political science ideas when you look at it. I mean, people can go in circles and yet not be able to define what nationalism is, and in the end, they start fighting with each other. One problem is because the way the Europeans or the Western civilizations have looked at nationalism, and the history of German nationalism and these world wars and the extermination of Jews and the Jews finding a home, going, all that history, which is very recent and still fresh, clouds this whole idea of nationalism, and in a sense, this nationalism has been tainted with. But bringing in Vivekananda, bringing in Aurobindo, bringing in Subramanian Bharati, and also I think Chinmaya, and saying that it is India which is manifested in so many ways. I think that's a beautiful way of looking at and actually embracing diversity, and while looking at the underlying unity and thread of unity. So this is an idea which is what India is all about, and we need to certainly uh, uh, develop this idea and also make it intelligible to others, people. So you ended with this Vasudev Kutumbakam theme, which is now in the official theme of G20. But the problem is that there is not enough work in India on this theme of G20, the intellectual or the theoretical conceptual work. I think the way you explained is a significant, uh, uh, significant progress. And I think we should develop this theme far more, what shall I say, intensively, and present it as a global idea, which people should get interested and people should comment. No, it should not simply because we have one G20 and there will be some slogans and there will be some banners, and after 1 year we all forget about it.
Correct.
Fortunately, in the VIF, we have been looking at this for some time, and I think I can see Arpita Mitra on the screen. She was here in the VIF. Now she is a lecturer in Burdwan University. Great to see you, Arpita. And she had done a lot of work on Vasudev Kutumbakam some years ago. And I think we need to restart that work, and in a much more a conceptual work, theoretical work also needs to be done. You see, one good thing about the Western think tanks and Western universities is that they theorize everything.
Yeah.
To make it interesting for academics and so on. And I'm seeing that same tendency in China also. So they're also beginning to talk about international relations theory with Chinese characteristics, international relations, great power relations with the Chinese characteristics, new types of this and new types of that and so on. But where is the Indian discourse on this? So while we listen to people like you or read the Vivekananda, etc., we see that it's extremely rich, but it has never come in our common discourse, practical discourse, whether it is in the media or in our political discourse or in our foreign policy discourse. We mentioned Jaishankar's book, which is a good thing, but I think a lot more work needs to be done, and so that's why your lecture is very important. So now I invite Arpita to make a few comments, and then is there any other 10 minutes, or then we'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I thank you once again for inviting me to be a discussant to this paper, because it's nice to be back with you, although it's online. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because I can hear an echo. I don't know. So I hope the line is clear. Okay, so I just have 3 observations. Thank you, Dr. Mohandas, for your wonderful presentation, for bringing together such a diverse range of subjects from Vedanta to nationalism to putting it into a contemporary idiom, matching it with our contemporary concerns and questions. I have 3 points. Like, first of all, if I've understood it correctly, you are tying Vedanta to nationalism in the way that you are trying to explain. The way Vedanta explains multiplicity in a world which is, in essence, one. That is what you are trying to connect in the Indian nationalist context, right? Because most people have this problem with India, that how can a country of such diversity be one country,
Yes.
right? Is it how you are drawing the connection between Vedanta and nationalism?
That is one aspect, but it can also be added with another layer to it. Maybe should I explain now?
Yes, please explain the other layer, then I can take it up from
Yeah,
there.
so I think when we talk about the Indianness or the Indian thinking that way, one thing that is common across concepts or across disciplines is this ability to integrate diversity, the ability to appreciate diversity and encourage it as well. To give another example, let us say the text called Natya Shastra. Now, Natya Shastra is a text on dramaturgy, on theater and dances, etc. Now, it comes up with its own theory, it comes up with its own theory of all of this, but then it expresses itself across India and across Southeast Asia as different kinds of dance and art forms and theater. However, so on the face of it, Bharatanatyam is not Kuchipudi, Kuchipudi is not Kathak, Kathak is not the the Thailand. I mean, I forget the name of that particular dance form. So it is all different on the face of it, but then somebody who is well versed in Natya Shastra can see that it is one and the same. So now what I'm trying to say is that even when you look at the Indian nationalism space, now this particular idea has permeated it, and that is what makes it accept diversity and also remain united at the same time. And this, I think, is the one of the critical aspects of Indian way of thinking.
Okay, so my first point I derived from here. You very beautifully placed it. Like, I think one Swamiji at the Chinmaya Mission put it to you, that it's not that there are a lot of things and we are trying to find the one among us, but it's basically one thing which is expressing itself as many. Now, I would like to add something to this process. There is one which has become many. Now, we are seeing many. There is also a process through which this many have come to be synthesized as one. You mentioned Sister Nivedita, she uses this concept of synthesis.
Yeah, correct.
This idea that India is basically one, which is manifest as many, is related. We can tie it with Aurobindo's conception of India as a nation soul. That essentially it's a spiritual entity which is manifesting itself through social diversity. Right. But then again, there is another step to it where this diversity is also coming together as a synthesis.
Okay.
Right, there is one which is becoming many, then again many is also appearing as a synthesis. This second step, now drawing from this point, I'm going to my second point, which is that somewhere you are highlighting the fact that India is a spiritual entity, whether factors related to time have contributed to it coming together as a nation or not is not so important. I would like to say that there is no contradiction between the historical dimension and the spiritual dimension.
Right. Okay.
I think both of them actually together give us the picture. I mean, the fact that India has been one civilization, it is possible to prove it through history also, through the temporal dimension.
Correct.
Right? So it takes care of both the aspects, not only for those who are looking for a spiritual explanation, but there are people who look for a social explanation, social scientific explanation. So for them to highlight the historical processes through which India has been a nation state. Now the difference is that it's not a nation state the way France is a nation state or Germany is a nation state or Britain is a nation state, but it's a nation state in its own right.
True.
In its own terms, on its own terms. So that is something that we need to remember. So this was my second point. And my third point was, frankly, when I heard the topic of your lecture, I was actually expecting something else. Since that was missing, let me highlight that as well. This is my third point. This is where Vedanta and nationalism also comes together, especially in the context of Swami Vivekananda. You must be knowing that he had given this concept of practical Vedanta.
Yeah, true.
Right? which is that he had said that Shankara left the Advaita philosophy in the forests and in the caves. Now I've come to broadcast it to the workaday world.
True.
Right, that there is a practical application of this. And in the context of India, he had given this concept of practical patriotism also. In the context of India, he wanted us to see that divinity in our countrymen, in our fellow countrymen and women. Right, I just want to read out a quotation of Vivekananda because that's self-explanatory. This is from one of the lectures he gave after he came back from the West. What vain God, yes. For the next 50 years, this alone shall be our keynote. This, our great Mother India. Let all other vain gods disappear from the time, from our minds. This is the only God that is awake, our own race. Everywhere his hands, everywhere his feet, everywhere his ears, he covers everything. All other gods are sleeping. What vain gods shall we go after and yet cannot worship the God that we see all around us, the Virat? When we have worshipped this, we shall be able to worship all other gods. Then I'm skipping a little bit. The first of all worship is the worship of the Virat, of those all around us. Worship it. Worship is the exact equivalent of the Sanskrit word, and no other English word will do. These are our gods, men and animals, and the first gods we have to worship are our own countrymen. These we have to worship instead of being jealous of each other and fighting each other. It is the most terrible karma for which we are suffering, and yet it does not open our eyes. So here, the other connection between Vedanta and nationalism, that our own country, our own countrymen are also divinity. They have forgotten their divinity. You referred to Swamiji talking about the upliftment of the masses, right?
Yeah.
He basically talks about the upliftment of the masses and of women. These are the two important prerequisites for national upliftment. He said that the masses have forgotten their individuality. They have forgotten that they are divine. They have even forgotten that they are human. Right. So
Yeah.
this is how Vedanta can also be tied to nationalism, to patriotism, that we see the divinity in our countrymen and we do accordingly, we act accordingly. I think these were the only 3 points that I had to make, sir. So I think I'm done for the moment.
Thank you, Arpita, for those very profound points that you have made it so succinctly. Now I'll open this for discussion. Is there anybody who'd like to comment or question? Anybody sitting here?
So, I'm asking you a question. I have not read, and I'm not such a deep reader of it. But